Hello everyone and welcome back to Chapter 5. Now we're going to be discussing the impacts language has on us. And we will start with naming an identity, then move on to affiliation, power and politeness, sexism and racism, precision and vagueness, and the language of responsibility, all of which have distinct effects on us, and the fact that there are so many effects on us really speaks to the impact that language can have. So we start with naming an identity. Names shape the way others think of us, the way we view ourselves, and the way that we act. There are friends who have certain names who are like, wow, that's a really cool name, or oh, that's a weird name. And yes, that seems like a very silly, very minute impact on us, but people with non-normative, in studies, people with non-normative names suffered psychological and emotional disturbances. So, but that being said, what makes a name unusual can change over time, and some regard unique names as distinct. One of my good friends, Demetrius, really cool name, and it is distinctive. Next, we have affiliation. Affiliation is building and demonstrating solidarity with others through speech. What sort of language do we use to build solidarity with others? We may use the same language as others when we talk about sports, or using the language of sports builds solidarity. In the same way, also video game language builds solidarity. There is specific language within these groups that create convergence, which is the process of adapting one's speech style to match that of others with whom the communicator wants to identify. And in the flip side of that, and another way to create affiliation is divergence, which is speaking in a way that emphasizes differences. A good example of convergence may be using words like noob, um, scrub, uh, leet. I don't know if people use that one anymore, but when we speak in that sort of way, we are converging within that gamer group. In the same way, we can also diverge from other groups. A good example of this is young people. That there tends to be a sort of way that people speak. And then people then diverge from that, especially young kids, diverge from that way by using slang. Who's got the tea? Is it lit? Is it Gucci? All of that shows a divergence from the other group simply because maybe the other group can't understand it. And when they do understand it and when they do communicate it, then it is seen as weird because they are older, but also because that is not their language. That's young people language. But obviously, once those young people get older, then that language will change again, that people will then further diverge from that group. Next, we have politeness, or the power and politeness. There's powerless language and powerful language. Powerless language is tentative, indirect hedges, hesitations, intensifiers, and disclaimers, whereas powerful language is direct, forceful declarations and assertions. So there are two distinct types of speaking, and it shows power. The way power works in communication is that one person tends to, that in communication, if one person has it, the other person doesn't. So when one does speak with more powerful language, the other person will reflect that and speak powerlessly. In the same way, with nonverbal communication, using powerful nonverbal behavior also creates an opposite reaction. What is politeness? Is politeness powerful or powerless? Interestingly enough, politeness would be seen as powerless, but that's not necessarily bad. In some situations, you should act in powerless ways. A good example of this is if you are brainstorming with a group of people about a best course of action and you do not have the expertise required to offer substantial input. You may offer input, but you may use disclaimers or intensifiers or tentative language to basically show that I may not be the best expert in this. Politeness can save both the face of both the sender and the receiver, and in so doing, create harmony. So, we also have Grice's maxims. This speaks to politeness. The rules of conversation and cooperation are called maxims, uh, and are called maxim, and Grice stated that we use them in conversation. There is quantity. One maxim is quantity, that we should not have too much or too little conversation. We want to be just right. Quality means honest, straightforward telling what you believe. We also have relation. The relation must be important to the conversation and clear to the context, meaning that if I am speaking to someone who I do not really know very well about something very personal, that would violate that relation maxim. And lastly, manner. Clear and coherent word usage, not speaking clearly or mumbling, can potentially be seen as not impolite. Next, we have sexism. And sexist language is language that unnecessarily differentiates between females and males and excludes, trivializes, or diminishes either sex. This, unfortunately, is something that we still have to deal with. And it is more prevalent than may be apparent. So some ways to eliminate it are to eliminate sex-specific terms or substitute neutral terms. Instead of saying, a businessman, trying to eliminate that and saying business person. We think in language, and when we just use the masculine term, then we see businessman and don't consider businesswoman. So, you can either eliminate sex-specific terms or substitute neutral terms, or mark the sex clearly to heighten awareness of whether the reference is to a male or to a female. This may be in certain situations where that is specifically called for, but more often we want to try to remove those sex-specific terms. And great. Now we talk about racism. Racist language reflects a worldview that classifies members of one racial group as superior and another as inferior. This is obviously bad, and we want to be sure that we're removing. So, ways to eliminate it are to eliminate offensive labels or slurs. By changing our language in even small ways can help reduce this racist language, make it less appropriate, and in so doing, affect others with that language. Also, eliminate innocent uses of racist language that are not meant to be taken seriously, but maintain solidarity within a racist viewpoint. A good example of this, I feel, is jokes about race. While while it may seem innocent, it can put people in a certain box that can lead to some detrimental effects. And we want to be sure that we're also watching out for ethnic modifiers to words, because instead of saying a doctor, saying a black doctor or a Mexican doctor or a Chinese doctor, that can say that that sort of puts it in this weird lens where there are doctors and then there's the Mexican doctor. So it puts someone in a different term. Next, we have precision and vagueness. Ambiguous language consists of words and phrases that have more than one commonly accepted definition. So in general, we may want to try to avoid ambiguous language, but that being said, there are still some times that ambiguous language may be called for. That it's especially to achieve our own objectives. A good example of this may be that someone that you and your parent is fighting. I want to go to a party. No, you can't go to the party. Okay, fine. I'm going. Where are you going? I'm going out. Okay, by using that ambiguous language, by abstracting meaning, it makes it so that it is more vague to the point where I may be able to end up getting what I want. In the same way, this can also be used as a politeness ritual, because if someone is wearing a very bad shirt, you may not say it looks ugly, you may say it looks colorful, and using that ambiguous language to be honest but still be vague. So we engage in abstraction, which is generalizing about similarities between several generalizing about similarities between several objects, people, ideas, or events. So in general, to abstract meaning from what you're saying. So for example, the more abstract of this is that you need to have a better attitude, whereas the specific would be you need to quit complaining every time we have to work late or come in on weekends. This more specific would be better in feedback situations, because with feedback, by focusing on the specific, it can make it so that it is not about the other person, it's not judging. Instead, it is about focusing on the specific behavior that is problematic. It's not that you are problematic, it is that the behavior is problematic, which can make it make it less likely to be perceived as a personal attack. That So when self-disclosing information, is it easier to be abstract or concrete? Obviously, it's a lot easier to be abstract in these situations. But when it is self-disclosure that is important, or if it's in a serious relationship, by abstracting meaning, it's not communicating exactly what you want. It may be pushing back this situation where I would need to disclose. It may not. May make it so that I don't have to disclose. But over time, that would diminish the relationship. So we want to strive to be more specific with self-disclosure. We even have euphemisms. Euphemisms are using an innocuous term instead in favor of a blunt one. So for example, instead of someone died, Steve died, instead he passed away. So the reason why we do this is because it removes some of the meaning of the language so that it doesn't hurt as much, it doesn't impact us as much, but there is a serious cost to euphemisms, because if we do that, and if we use a lot of euphemistic language, it can diminish the impact of serious issues. For example, homeless people. They aren't homeless, they're economically disadvantaged people. Using the euphemism, it makes it so that you don't really have the feeling of that. And moving forward on precision and vagueness, there's also two different types of language regarding this as well: relative language versus evaluative language. Relative language gains meaning by comparison, whereas evaluative language seems to describe something but really announces the speaker's attitudes toward it. So for example, with relative language, is it cold outside? Are you tall? Are you beautiful? It's relative. So, yeah. We also have evaluative language. And this this speaks to the difference between these examples. If someone said progressive, that might be that they are describing it, but they are really also just showing their attitude toward it. Versus radical, that would show the opposite attitude, or blunt versus direct, or argumentative versus assertive, all of which already show the speaker's attitude toward it, which can be good in some situations, but a lot of times it can lead to some challenges because um, it already creates a sort of judgment of it. We instead want to be more specific, especially in feedback scenarios. The language of responsibility is the last impact we're going to cover. There's it statements, which replace I or me with it's to avoid taking a position. So instead of I don't think it's a good idea, saying it's a bad idea. That sort of removes yourself from that situation. So you aren't really taking responsibility for it. It's a bad idea instead of I don't think it's a good idea. We also have but statements, which cancel out the thought that precedes it. Can be a face-saving strategy that's worth using sometimes, but we should strive to break these up and turn them into two complete different sentences because uh, because we don't want to contradict ourselves. It can be seen as powerless. So instead of saying, um, yeah, I mean, yeah, instead of saying, you know what, I really, really care about you, but I think that, I think that your family is crazy. Instead of that, saying, I really care about you. I don't really get along with your family very well. Just like that, it's now two different ideas instead of not that first idea, just the second idea. We also have you statements, I statements, and we statements. You statements express judgment of the other person, whereas I statements are assertive, more accurate, and less judgmental. This can be a lot more effective, especially in those feedback situations, especially when talking about issues that people are able to get very defensive about because it is more accurate. You're taking responsibility for your own perception of something instead of saying, you did this. That outside of my perspective, you are this. Restatements are an extra part of this. It implies that the issue is the concern and responsibility of both the speaker and the receiver of a message, and this is very good within conflict. So, when we use a I statement, it can consist of describing the other person's behavior. I feel like when I talked to you about this thing, you yelled at me a lot. You then didn't pay attention to me, or I felt like I wasn't paid attention to. Uh, uh, I noticed that you walked away from me. I noticed that there was yelling at me, and then I also noticed that uh, that what happened next was a conversation between you and Steve about this same conversation about this situation. Then my feelings. I feel like that that may I felt like that was a bit rude because we were talking about this and then I felt very attacked and then to compound that then you went off to go talk to someone else about it without discussing it with me. So I feel like this, and then the consequences of the other person's behavior with you. I feel like if this sort of stuff continues, that the relationship is going to suffer for it. And just like that, you've created an I statement that doesn't attack the other person. It just shows how you were affected by it. So, we've talked about the language of responsibility and all of the other impacts of language. Now let's talk about how gender and language intersect. So, gender theory focuses within two big camps: significant differences between men and women and minor differences between men and women. That being said, it is very hard to have a one answer for this because there's a little bit of both. You know, men and women have significant differences in ways they behave socially and significant differences in the way they use language. I mean, because it is in essence two different cultures. But there's also people who believe that there's minor differences, that it's not as clear cut. Only 1% in variance in communication behavior resulted from sex differences, instead, that it is simply culture. So, it's far more similar, it's far more different, you decide. Social media and language also play into language. Online language and impression management. How do people manage impressions online? Via text, dating websites, Facebook, and email. Especially with social media, text takes more priority. That we don't have access to nonverbal behavior, and as a result, it's easier for us to engage in very strategic and very controlled impression management. Text message errors can make the sender look bad. Subscribers to dating services can manipulate verbal photos and verbal self-descriptions. And Facebook friends try to put their best foot forward with strategic language choices. So we have a great deal of impact of control over our language in online communication. So we have to understand that, and that we are not basing our social comparisons on these Facebook dating service others. So, with online language and gender, these two intersect. Men use more large words, nouns, and swear words. Women tend to use more pronouns, verbs, hedge phrases. This is just how things sort of broke down. And that concludes Chapter 5, Language. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye!